The mining station hung in the void like a broken tooth, its hull scarred by countless meteor impacts and the slow burn of cosmic radiation. Captain Sarah Chen had seen worse facilities in her 20 years hauling cargo through the outer systems, but this one made her skin crawl in ways she couldn't quite explain. The massive structure rotated slowly, creating artificial gravity for its inhabitants. But something about the rhythm felt wrong, predatory. "Docking Bay 7 is clear for approach," came the gravelly voice through her ship's communication system. The translator struggled with the alien speech patterns, adding a metallic undertone that made every word sound like a threat. Sarah guided her freighter, the Lucky Strike, through the energy barrier that separated the bay from the vacuum of space. The artificial atmosphere rushed in around her ship as she settled onto the landing platform with practiced ease. Through her cockpit window, she watched the reception committee gathering. The Kalahari were impressive creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall on powerful legs that ended in clawed feet. Their bodies were covered in mottled gray fur that shifted from light to dark depending on their mood and position in their pack hierarchy. But it was their eyes that caught her attention. Yellow, intelligent, and currently fixed on her ship with unmistakable hunger. The pack leader stood at the center of the group, distinguished by the silver-white fur that marked his age and authority. Scars crisscrossed his massive frame, each one a story of battles fought and won. His name was Thakran, according to her briefing files, and he controlled this sector of space with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of interspecies cooperation. Sarah had dealt with the Kalahari before, but always through intermediaries or in groups where human authority was already established. This time was different. Her cargo hold contained medical supplies desperately needed by a human colony 3 systems away, and the fastest route ran directly through Kalahari space. Thakran's permission wasn't just recommended, it was absolutely required. She checked her sidearm one more time, though she knew it would be largely useless against creatures who could tear her apart with their bare hands. The weapon was more for psychological comfort than practical protection. Taking a deep breath, she lowered the cargo ramp and stepped onto the station's deck. The Kalahari pack spread out in a semicircle around her, their postures radiating controlled aggression. She could feel their eyes evaluating her every movement, cataloging weaknesses and measuring threat levels. The air recyclers couldn't quite mask their scent, a mixture of musk, metal, and something that reminded her uncomfortably of a predator's den. Thakran stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow that engulfed her entirely. When he spoke, his voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the deck plating. "Human, you seek passage through our territory." It wasn't a question. Sarah kept her chin up and her voice steady. "That's correct. I have medical supplies for the Kepler colony. They're experiencing an outbreak of Rigelian fever." "Your cargo interests me less than your attitude," Thakran replied, circling her slowly. "Do you understand where you are, little human?" The casual dismissal in his tone sparked something dangerous in Sarah's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm in Kalahari space, aboard your station, requesting safe passage in accordance with the trade agreements between our species." Several of the pack members behind Thakran made sounds that might have been laughter, but sounded more like the huffing of predators who'd found particularly amusing prey. The pack leader stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive body. "Trade agreements," he repeated, tasting the words. "Human bureaucracy. Paper promises that mean nothing when we are light years from your nearest patrol fleet." Sarah's hands remained steady at her sides, but her mind was racing. The situation was deteriorating faster than she'd expected. The Kalahari respected strength and despised weakness, but there was a fine line between showing backbone and triggering their hunting instincts. "The agreements benefit both our species," she said carefully. Your people profit from human trade routes, and we gain access to Kalahari mining expertise. Perhaps, Thakran acknowledged. But here, in this place, there is only one law that matters, pack law, and in any pack there must be order, hierarchy, discipline. He gestured to his followers, who immediately straightened their postures in response. The movement was automatic, instinctive, born from generations of evolutionary programming that demanded submission to the strongest. Every member of my pack knows their place, Thakran continued. They know to whom they owe obedience. They understand the consequences of defiance. The threat was clear now, hanging in the recycled air like the scent of ozone before a storm. Sarah realized that this wasn't really about trade agreements or safe passage. This was about dominance, about forcing her to acknowledge Thakran's authority in the most fundamental way possible. "I'm not a member of your pack," she said quietly. Thakran's eyes narrowed, his lip curling to reveal teeth that could crush steel. "Perhaps not. But you are in my territory, dependent on my goodwill for safe passage. That makes you subject to my authority, whether you accept it or not." Around the semicircle, the other Kalahari shifted restlessly. Sarah could sense their anticipation, the barely controlled excitement of predators who sensed weakness. But she also noticed something else, uncertainty. This wasn't normal pack behavior. Thakran was pushing boundaries, testing something that none of them fully understood. "Let me be very clear about your situation, human," Thakran continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried perfect clarity. "Your ship contains cargo my people could use. Your presence here provides an opportunity to clarify certain misunderstandings about human-Kalahari relations. And you are very, very far from any help." He leaned down, bringing his massive head level with hers. At this distance, she could see the individual whiskers that sprouted from his muzzle, the pattern of scars that marked his face, the calculating intelligence behind those predatory eyes. "I am the pack leader here," he said, each word carefully enunciated. "Every creature on this station obeys my commands without question. Every decision, every action, every breath they take occurs at my pleasure. This is the natural order." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach as she finally understood the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about her cargo or safe passage. Thakran was making an example, establishing a precedent that would affect every human who passed through his territory afterward. "Your species has been fortunate," he continued, straightening to his full height. "You have encountered Kalahari who were willing to negotiate, to pretend that your weakness was somehow equal to our strength. But that changes today." The pack members behind him were practically vibrating with excitement now, their yellow eyes gleaming in the artificial light. Whatever was about to happen, they had been anticipating it for a long time. "Kneel!" Thakran commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a creature who had never been disobeyed. "Accept your place in the hierarchy, and I will consider allowing you to complete your mission." The words hit her like a physical blow. Around the semicircle, the other Kalahari went completely still, waiting to see how she would respond. The air itself seemed to thicken with tension, charged with the potential for violence. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel sweat forming on her palms, despite the station's cool temperature. Every instinct screamed at her to submit, to buy time and figure out another solution. The logical part of her mind calculated odds and found them overwhelmingly unfavorable. But there was something else rising in her chest, something that had nothing to do with logic or survival instincts. It was the same feeling that had driven her ancestors to leave Earth's safety for the unknown dangers of space, the stubborn human refusal to accept that anything was impossible. Thakran waited, his yellow eyes fixed on her face, reading every micro-expression and cataloging her fear. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear, carrying easily across the docking bay. But the words themselves sent a shock through the assembled pack that was almost physical in its intensity. "Try me!" The simple phrase hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before the gods themselves. Thakran's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his absolute confidence. Behind him, several pack members took involuntary steps backward, their genetic programming telling them that something fundamental had just shifted in the natural order. For a long moment, nobody moved. The pack leader stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. In his entire life, spanning decades of absolute dominance, no creature had ever responded to his commands with such casual defiance. The human female stood before him, her tiny frame dwarfed by his massive bulk, and simply waited. There was no fear in her posture now, no submission in her eyes. She had drawn a line in the deck plating and dared him to cross it. Thakran's lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed every one of his formidable teeth. The sound that emerged from his throat was something between a roar and a growl, the voice of a predator whose dominance had been questioned for the first time in living memory. "You dare," he whispered, the words barely coherent through his rage. "You dare challenge me?" Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying him with the same detached curiosity she might show an interesting geological formation. "I'm not challenging you. I'm just telling you that if you want me to kneel, you're going to have to make me. And that might not go the way you think it will." The pack leader's massive hands clenched into fists, claws extending unconsciously as his body prepared for violence. Around the semicircle, the other Kalahari backed away, some of them whimpering softly as they found themselves caught between their loyalty to their leader and their growing uncertainty about what they were witnessing. The standoff stretched between them, predator and prey locked in a contest that would determine not just Sarah's fate, but the future relationship between their species. The Lucky Strike's cargo hold contained medical supplies that could save thousands of lives, but that had become secondary to something far more fundamental. This was about respect, about the right to exist without submission, about the question of whether strength always trumped will. And in a docking bay on a mining station in the middle of nowhere, a human freighter captain prepared to find out which mattered more. The air between them crackled with potential violence. Two incompatible worldviews about to collide with explosive force. Whatever happened next would echo through the sector for years to come, affecting every encounter between human and Kalahari from this moment forward. Thakran's yellow eyes blazed with fury and confusion as he tried to understand how a creature so obviously weak could stand before him without fear. And Sarah Chen waited, her hands steady and her spine straight, for whatever came next. The silence that followed Sarah's words was deafening. Even the station's mechanical hum seemed muted, as if the facility itself held its breath waiting for what would come next. Thakran's massive chest rose and fell with barely controlled rage, each exhalation a low growl that vibrated through the deck plating. Behind the pack leader, his followers exchanged nervous glances. This was uncharted territory for all of them. In their entire evolutionary history, the Kalahari had never encountered a creature that could look death in the face and simply shrug. "You think your defiance makes you strong," Thakran finally said, his voice a deadly whisper. "You are wrong. It makes you foolish." He began to circle her again, but this time his movements were different. Gone was the casual confidence of a predator toying with prey. Now he moved like a hunter studying dangerous quarry, calculating angles and vulnerabilities. "I have crushed rebellion before," he continued, his yellow eyes never leaving her face. "Entire packs have learned to fear my displeasure. Worlds have submitted to my authority." Sarah turned slowly to keep him in sight, her own movements economical and precise. I'm sure they have. But I'm not a pack member, and Earth isn't your world. The mention of her home planet caused several of the watching Kalahari to shift uncomfortably. They had heard stories about Earth, whispered tales that filtered through trade networks and military reports, a world where apex predators had been driven to extinction by creatures that should have been prey, where pack hunting had been replaced by something far more dangerous, organized warfare. Earth, Thakran spat, as if the word itself left a bitter taste. Your birth world of soft creatures who hide behind technology because they lack the strength to survive on their own. Soft? Sarah's eyebrow arched slightly. Is that what you think we are? She reached slowly toward her belt, causing half a dozen Kalahari to tense and bare their teeth. But instead of drawing a weapon, she pulled out a small data pad and activated its holographic display. This is what soft creatures built, she said, gesturing to the three-dimensional image that materialized between them. The hologram showed a massive structure in space, clearly artificial, but shaped like nothing the Kalahari had ever seen. It was angular and purposeful, bristling with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand stellar flares. Even in miniature, the display radiated an aura of raw, destructive power. The Yamato-class dreadnought, Sarah continued conversationally. 800 meters of concentrated human engineering. Its main guns can punch through the core of a moon, and its armor can withstand a direct hit from a solar prominence. Thakran's circling had stopped. His eyes were fixed on the hologram. His predator's instincts recognizing something that defied his understanding of the natural order. We've built 12 of them so far, Sarah added, watching the pack leader's expression carefully. And they're not even our newest design. She manipulated the display, and the dreadnought was replaced by something even more ominous. This ship was sleeker, more organic in its curves, but the weapon signatures that surrounded it made the previous vessel look like a toy. The Prometheus-class deep space explorer. It can travel between galaxies, survive in the void between stars, and establish colony beachheads on worlds that would kill any known species within hours. The watching Kalahari were backing away now, their genetic programming screaming warnings about predators they couldn't identify. The images floating between Sarah and their pack leader represented something beyond their comprehension, a species that had turned the cosmos itself into hunting grounds. Impressive toys, Thakran said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. But you are not aboard one of your mighty vessels now. You are here, alone, surrounded by my pack. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Thakran felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in that expression that reminded him uncomfortably of his own reflection when he cornered particularly dangerous prey. You're right, she agreed. I'm not aboard a dreadnought or an explorer. I'm on a simple cargo hauler with basic defensive systems and a crew of one. She gestured toward her ship, the Lucky Strike, which suddenly looked far less helpless than it had moments before. But here's what you don't understand about humans, she continued, her voice taking on an educational tone that was somehow more threatening than any roar or challenge. We don't build our ships to hunt. We build them to survive. Every freighter, every passenger liner, every maintenance skiff is designed to function in environments that would destroy your homeworld. The hologram changed again, showing a cutaway view of her ship. The cargo hold that Thakran coveted was revealed to be surrounded by armor plating that could withstand atmospheric entry. The simple-looking engines were actually fusion torches, capable of accelerating to significant fractions of light speed. The basic defensive systems included point defense lasers that could track and destroy incoming missiles with surgical precision. The Lucky Strike might not look like much, Sarah said, but she survived solar flares, asteroid storms, and 3 separate pirate attacks. Her hull is rated for deep space operations in hostile environments, Her life support can function for months without external resources, and her navigation system can plot courses through hazards that would trap your best pilots. She paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. But the ship isn't what should worry you. It's the pilot. Thakran's eyes narrowed, his hunting instincts finally identifying what had been bothering him since the human first spoke. This wasn't just defiance. It was confidence based on capability. The same calm certainty that marked an apex predator in its native territory. "You speak of your technology," he growled, "but technology can fail. Weapons can malfunction. Ships can be destroyed." "Absolutely," Sarah agreed. "That's why we don't rely on them." She moved, then, not toward him or away, but in a casual shift that somehow placed her in a position where none of the watching pack members could approach her without exposing their flanks to each other. The movement was so natural that it took several seconds for the tactical implications to register. "Human military training begins at age 16, she said, continuing her lecture as if she hadn't just repositioned herself to neutralize a dozen potential attackers. "Every citizen serves at least 4 years in some form of defense capacity. We learn small unit tactics, survival techniques, and combat procedures that have been refined through centuries of warfare." Thakran's massive hands flexed, claws extending and retracting as he processed this information. The Kalahari were natural warriors, born with weapons and instincts that made them formidable in individual combat. But warfare was something different, something that required organization and discipline beyond simple pack dynamics. "I've served on 17 different worlds," Sarah continued. "Some had gravity 3 times Earth normal. Others had atmospheres that would dissolve your lungs in minutes. I fought in vacuum, underwater, and in environments where the very ground was trying to kill me." The pack members were growing increasingly agitated, their formation beginning to break down as individual fear overrode group loyalty. They had expected a simple display of dominance, a quick demonstration that would reinforce their pack leader's authority. Instead, they were witnessing something that challenged everything they understood about the natural order. "But the real difference," Sarah said, her voice dropping to match Thakran's earlier whisper, "isn't the training, or the technology, or even the experience. It's something much more fundamental." She took a step forward, and impossibly, the massive pack leader took a step back. "Humans don't have pack leaders," she explained. "We have commanders, officers, and leaders of various types, but our loyalty isn't based on strength or dominance. It's based on mutual respect and shared purpose." Another step forward, another retreat. The watching Kalahari could hardly believe what they were seeing. Their pack leader, who had never backed down from anything in his life, was being driven backward by a creature barely a quarter his size. "When a human gives an order, it's not because they're the strongest or the most violent," Sarah continued. "It's because they've earned the right to command through competence, sacrifice, and proven judgment." Thakran's back hit the bulkhead behind him with a metallic clang that echoed through the docking bay. He was trapped, pinned against the wall not by physical force but by the inexorable pressure of ideas that his worldview couldn't process. "So when you demand that I kneel," Sarah said, stopping just outside his reach, but close enough that he could see the absolute certainty in her eyes, "you're not just asking me to submit to your strength. You're asking me to betray everything that makes me human." The pack leader's breathing was ragged now, his yellow eyes darting back and forth as he searched for an escape route that didn't exist. Around the docking bay, his followers watched in growing horror as their entire understanding of dominance and submission crumbled before their eyes. "I've knelt before," Sarah admitted, her voice softening slightly. "To commanders who earned my respect, to fallen comrades who deserved my grief, to principles and ideas that were worth dedicating my life to defend." She leaned forward slightly, and Thakran pressed himself against the bulkhead as if he could somehow merge with the metal. "But I have never knelt to a bully," she said, her words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "And I never will." The silence that followed was different from the earlier tension. This was the quiet that comes after a fundamental shift in reality, when old certainties have been shattered and new possibilities begin to emerge. Thakran stared down at the human female who had somehow managed to corner him without laying a finger on him. His mind raced, searching for a way to salvage the situation, to restore his authority and dominance. But every option he could think of led to outcomes that his instincts warned him to avoid. Behind him, his pack members began to stir. Some were backing toward the docking bay exits, their confidence in their leader's invincibility shaken beyond repair. Others watched with fascination as their worldview expanded to accommodate new possibilities. And in the center of it all, Sarah Chen waited patiently for Thakran to make his choice. She had laid out the parameters of their conflict with surgical precision, demonstrating that his physical advantages were meaningless in a context he didn't understand. The pack leader's yellow eyes blazed with frustrated rage, but beneath the fury was something else, a growing awareness that he had encountered something beyond his experience or control. The human hadn't just defied him. She had rendered his entire approach to dominance obsolete. For the first time in his life, Thakran found himself facing a creature he couldn't intimidate, couldn't overpower, and couldn't understand. The natural order that had governed his existence for decades was crumbling around him, replaced by something far more complex and nuanced. The standoff continued, but the dynamics had shifted completely. No longer was this a simple confrontation between predator and prey. This was a clash between two different philosophies of existence, two incompatible approaches to leadership and authority. And as the moments ticked by, it became increasingly clear that only one of them truly understood the rules they were playing by. Sarah's earlier words echoed in the recycled air of the docking bay. "Try me." But now they carried a different meaning entirely, not a challenge to physical combat, but an invitation to discover just how far the gulf between their species really extended. The pack leader, pressed against the bulkhead, began to understand that this confrontation was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. The deadlock stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Thakran's massive frame was pressed against the bulkhead, his yellow eyes locked with Sarah's steady gaze. Around them, the pack members shifted nervously, their genetic programming struggling to process a situation that had no precedent in their evolutionary history. Then, unexpectedly, Sarah stepped back. The movement was casual, unthreatening, but it created space between them that hadn't existed moments before. Thakran remained frozen against the wall, unsure whether this was some new form of attack or an opportunity to reclaim his dignity. "You know what the interesting thing is?" Sarah said, her tone conversational as she moved toward a stack of cargo containers near her ship. All of this could have been avoided. She hopped up to sit on one of the containers, her legs dangling like a child's. The casual posture was somehow more unsettling than any aggressive stance could have been. "See, you made an assumption about humans that lots of species make," she continued. "You looked at us and saw weak creatures who succeeded through luck and technology. But that's only part of the story." Thakran slowly peeled himself away from the bulkhead, his movements cautious and measured. His pack members watched him with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright fear. Their unshakable leader was shaken, and they didn't know how to process that reality. "The truth is, we're not the strongest species in the galaxy," Sarah admitted. "We're not the fastest, or the smartest, or the most technologically advanced. But we have one trait that makes us uniquely dangerous." She gestured toward the pack members who were still backing toward the exits. "We adapt. Not just physically, though we do that too. We adapt socially, culturally, Technologically, we take whatever the universe throws at us and find ways to not just survive, but thrive. Thakran found his voice, though it came out as more of a growl than coherent speech. Adaptation is weakness. It shows you have no true nature, no consistent strength. Sarah smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. See, that's where you're wrong. Adaptation isn't the absence of nature. It's the ultimate expression of our nature. She pulled out her datapad again and activated a new display. This time, instead of showing weapons or ships, the hologram depicted a simple graph that tracked human expansion across the galaxy over time. 50,000 years ago, humans lived on one world, in small tribes scattered across various climates and terrains, she began. We had no natural weapons, no thick hide, no enhanced senses. By all rights, we should have been prey for every apex predator on the planet. The graph showed a slow, steady expansion outward from Earth's solar system. But we had something those predators didn't. We could learn from our mistakes, share knowledge across generations, and cooperate with individuals who weren't part of our immediate family group. Several of the pack members had stopped their retreat and were listening despite themselves. The concept of cooperation beyond blood relations was alien to them. But the evidence of its effectiveness was undeniable. When we encountered the first alien species, Sarah continued, they tried to either conquer us or dismiss us as irrelevant. Both approaches failed for the same reason. They underestimated our ability to change. The hologram shifted to show a timeline of first contacts, each one representing a different approach to human-alien relations. The hegemony tried to crush us through military force. We studied their tactics, adapted our strategies, and eventually negotiated a peace treaty that benefited both species. Thakran's eyes narrowed as he recognized the implications of her words. The trade consortium attempted to control us through economic manipulation. We learned their methods, improved upon them, and became indispensable partners in galactic commerce. The pack leader took a tentative step forward, his scientific curiosity warring with his wounded pride. The collective believed we would submit to their superior organization and discipline. Instead, we showed them how individual initiative could enhance group effectiveness. Sarah deactivated the hologram and fixed Thakran with a steady gaze. Every species we've encountered has tried to fit us into their existing understanding of how the universe works, and every time, we've proven that understanding inadequate. She hopped down from the container and began walking slowly toward the center of the docking bay, drawing Thakran away from the wall through simple momentum. The Kalahari see strength in dominance, order through hierarchy, and stability through fear, she said. These aren't wrong concepts. They've served your species well for thousands of years. Thakran found himself following her, his massive frame dwarfing hers, but somehow feeling diminished in comparison. But they're not the only viable concepts, Sarah continued. Humans have learned that strength can come from cooperation, order from mutual agreement, and stability from adaptability. They reached the center of the bay, where she turned to face him directly. The pack members had formed a loose circle around them, no longer threatening but clearly fascinated by what they were witnessing. So when you demand that I kneel, she said, you're not just asserting your dominance, you're insisting that your way of understanding the universe is the only valid one. Thakran's breathing had steadied, his rage cooling into something more dangerous, intelligence. And you claim your way is superior? No, Sarah replied, surprising him. I claim our way is different, and difference isn't a threat that needs to be eliminated. It's an opportunity that should be explored. She gestured to the pack members surrounding them. Look at your followers. Really look at them. What do you see? Thakran's yellow eyes swept across his pack, taking in their expressions and postures with a predator's attention to detail. What he saw disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Fear, confusion, uncertainty. These were emotions he had deliberately cultivated to maintain his authority. But beneath them, he could detect something else. Curiosity, interest, a growing awareness that there might be alternatives to the only way they had ever known. "They're learning," Sarah observed, noting his expression. "Right now, in this moment, they're expanding their understanding of what's possible. And that scares you." "It should scare me," Thakran growled. "Chaos and disorder are the enemies of civilization. Without clear hierarchy, without unquestioned authority, society collapses." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's certainly one perspective, and it's worked for the Kalahari for a long time. But it's not the only way to maintain order." She began walking in a slow circle around him, but this time her movement wasn't predatory. It was contemplative, almost academic. Humans maintain order through consensus and shared purpose. Our military units function because every member understands their role and trusts their companions to fulfill theirs. Our societies work because citizens believe the system serves their interests. Thakran turned to keep her in sight, but his movements were no longer those of a hunter tracking prey. When conflicts arise, we negotiate, compromise, and adapt until we find solutions that work for everyone involved. It takes longer than simply imposing the will of the strongest, but the results are more stable and sustainable. One of the younger pack members, a female with darker fur and bright, intelligent eyes, took a hesitant step forward. "But what happens when individuals disagree? When their interests conflict?" Sarah's face lit up with approval. "Excellent question. The answer is that we've developed systems for resolving disputes that don't require physical dominance." She activated her data pad again, this time showing a complex flowchart that depicted human legal and arbitration processes. Courts, mediation, democratic voting, economic incentives. We have dozens of different methods for finding solutions that respect individual autonomy while maintaining social cohesion. The young female's eyes widened as she studied the display. Around the circle, other pack members leaned forward to get a better view, their fascination overcoming their training. Thakran watched his followers with growing unease. Their attention was no longer focused on him, but on the human and her alien concepts of cooperation and mutual respect. The foundation of his authority was eroding beneath his feet. "This is all very theoretical," he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier force. "But theory means nothing without practical application. You speak of cooperation and consensus, but you are alone here, facing my entire pack." Sarah turned back to him with that same warm smile that had been unnerving him since their confrontation began. "Am I?" Before Thakran could parse the meaning of her words, the docking bay's communication system crackled to life. A new voice filled the space, speaking in accented but clear Kalahari. "Mining Station Theta 7, this is the merchant vessel Golden Dawn requesting permission to dock." Thakran's eyes widened in shock. The Golden Dawn was a Kalahari ship, commanded by his own nephew, Verak. What was it doing here, and why was it requesting permission instead of simply docking at the family berth? "Golden Dawn, you have clearance for Bay 4, came the response from the station's control center. But the voice wasn't one of Thakran's usual operators. It was younger, female, speaking with the precise diction of someone following unfamiliar protocols. Sarah's smile widened. "While we've been talking, your communications officer has been having a very interesting conversation with my ship's AI. She was curious about human organizational methods, so I authorized a data exchange." The pack leader's mouth fell open as the implications hit him like a physical blow. "Your nephew's ship contacted the station an hour ago," Sarah continued conversationally. "Normally, family vessels don't need to request docking clearance, but your communications officer decided to implement some new procedures she learned about." Across the docking bay, the young female who had asked about dispute resolution stood a little straighter, her posture radiating quiet pride. She instituted a universal docking protocol based on human spacefield management techniques, Sarah explained. Every ship, regardless of affiliation, now follows the same procedure. It's more efficient, reduces confusion, and treats all vessels equally. Thakran whirled to stare at his communications officer, his yellow eyes blazing with betrayal and fury. "You had no authority to make such changes." The female met his gaze steadily, her own eyes bright with newfound confidence. "I had the authority you gave me to manage station communications efficiently. The new protocols reduce docking accidents by 40% and eliminate priority disputes between vessels. You implemented alien procedures without consultation. I improved existing procedures using proven techniques," she replied calmly. "The results speak for themselves." Around the circle, other pack members began exchanging glances. The communications officer's respectful but firm response represented something they had never seen before: disagreement with authority that wasn't based on challenge or rebellion, but on reasoned analysis and practical improvement. Sarah watched the byplay with deep satisfaction. "You see, your people aren't weak or disloyal. They're intelligent beings capable of growth and adaptation. All they needed was exposure to new possibilities." Thakran's massive hands clenched into fists, but his rage was no longer directed solely at the human. His own pack was slipping away from him, not through conquest or rebellion, but through the infinitely more dangerous process of education and choice. "This is corruption," he snarled. "You have poisoned my followers with alien ideas." "I've shared information," Sarah corrected gently. "What your people choose to do with that information is entirely up to them." She gestured to the pack members surrounding them, many of whom were now engaged in quiet conversations about what they had witnessed and learned. "The choice isn't between strength and weakness, order and chaos, or even tradition and change," she said. "The choice is between growth and stagnation, between fear and curiosity, between the comfort of certainty and the excitement of possibility." Thakran looked around at his followers, seeing them truly for perhaps the first time in years. They weren't mindless drones following his commands out of programmed instinct. They were individuals with their own thoughts, desires, and potential for development. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, he found himself feeling something he couldn't quite identify, a mixture of pride, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. "If I allow you to proceed," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper, "if I grant you safe passage and permit these new ideas to spread, what guarantee do I have that my authority will remain intact?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful as she considered the question seriously. "None," she admitted. "Authority based solely on strength and fear is inherently fragile. It requires constant reinforcement and cannot tolerate any form of dissent or questioning." Thakran's shoulders sagged slightly as his worst fears were confirmed. "But," Sarah continued, "authority based on respect, competence, and shared purpose is much more durable. It grows stronger when challenged because it welcomes improvement and adaptation." She gestured toward his communications officer, who was now explaining the new docking procedures to several interested pack members. "Look at her. She improved station operations using techniques she learned from our conversation. Does that diminish your leadership, or does it demonstrate the quality of the people you've gathered around you?" Thakran studied his communications officer with new eyes. Her initiative had indeed improved efficiency, and her willingness to explain her reasoning to others showed a level of engagement and enthusiasm he hadn't seen in years. "Your pack doesn't need a dominator," Sarah said gently. "It needs a leader. Someone who can guide them toward new possibilities while maintaining the unity and purpose that makes them strong." The massive alien looked down at the small human who had somehow managed to turn his entire worldview upside down without raising a weapon or issuing a threat. "And you believe I could be such a leader?" Sarah's smile was warm and genuine. "I believe you already are. You've created a successful operation in one of the most dangerous sectors of space. You've earned the loyalty of intelligent, capable individuals, and when faced with new ideas, your first instinct was to protect your people, not your own power." She extended her hand toward him, the human gesture of greeting and respect. "The question isn't whether you can adapt to new ways of thinking. The question is whether you're willing to try." Thakran stared down at her outstretched hand for a long moment, weighing the implications of what accepting it would mean. Around them, his pack members watched silently, understanding that this moment would define their future in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Finally, slowly, the pack leader reached out with one massive clawed hand and gently grasped Sarah's much smaller one. The gesture sent ripples of shock through the watching Kalahari, but beneath the surprise was something else: relief. The tension that had dominated the docking bay since Sarah's arrival began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of possibility and anticipation. "Safe passage granted," Thakran said quietly, his voice carrying across the bay with quiet authority. "And may your cargo reach those who need it." Sarah squeezed his hand gently before releasing it. "Thank you. And may your people find the strength that comes from choosing their own paths." As she turned to walk back toward her ship, the communications officer approached her pack leader with a data pad full of new ideas and suggestions. Other pack members began clustering in small groups, discussing what they had witnessed and what it might mean for their future. Thakran watched it all with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. His authority hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed into something he was only beginning to understand. The docking bay filled with the sound of conversation and debate as the Kalahari began to explore concepts they had never encountered before. And at the center of it all, their pack leader stood quietly, learning to lead in ways he had never imagined possible. The Lucky Strike's engines hummed to life as Sarah prepared for departure. But the cargo hold that Thakran had coveted now seemed less important than the ideas that had been exchanged in the past few hours. Sometimes the most valuable cargo couldn't be measured in tonnage or credits. Sometimes it was as simple as showing others that there was more than one way to be strong. As the freighter lifted away from the station and disappeared into the star-filled void, it left behind a small revolution that would ripple outward through Kalahari space for generations to come. And it had all started with two simple words: "Try me."